Are we good?
We're now live, Chair.
Excellent. I always like going live to the world. So good afternoon, folks. My name is Councillor Neil Walshaw, heading in Hyde Park Ward. Welcome to the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. I'll be chairing today's meeting. So can I remind members to turn their microphones to mute when they're not speaking and to use the hand raising function to indicate they would like to speak as we move through the agenda. So it's a remote meeting, as you all know, as you're all experiencing. We'll move through the introductions. We're going to do it in alphabetical order. So first on my list is actually Councillor Anderson, who's can't attend today, but he's substituting for Councillor Collins. So Councillor Collins, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Dawn Collins from Horsforth Ward. And as I said previously, I'm substituting for Councillor Barry Anderson today.
Welcome aboard the good ship SEAC. Number 2 is Councillor Bentley.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's Councillor Jonathan Bentley from Wheatwood Ward.
Next, Councillor Blackburn.
Sorry about that. Councillor David Blackburn, Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Councillor Garthwaite. Oh, sorry, I do apologize. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Neil Buckley, Old Woodley Ward.
And Councillor Al Garthwaite.
Councillor Al Garthwaite, Headingley and Hyde Park Ward.
Councillor Carlill.
Councillor Peter Carlill, Carvely and Farsley Ward.
Councillor Illingworth.
John Illingworth from Kirkstall Ward.
Councillor Midgley.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Morel Midgley from Kippax and Methley Ward.
Councillor Mulheron.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Lisa Mulheron from Arsley and Robin Hood Ward.
Councillor Shazad.
Good afternoon, Chair. Councillor Mohammed Shazad from the Morton and Meanwood Ward. Thank you.
Councillor Wadsworth next on my list, but I don't think he's here yet. And then Councillor Ray.
Councillor Paul Ray, Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Thanks very much, folks. And let's round up through officers. Polly.
Hi, Polly Kirk, Chief Officer of Sustainable Energy and Air Quality.
And Harriet.
Good afternoon, Harriet Spake, Governance Services.
Wonderful. Excellent. That's the longest section of the meeting, I think, isn't it? We have to do these things in a systematic matter. Right. So I will move through the chair's bullets of agenda and then we get onto our substantive items. So number 1, Harriet, any appeals?
There are no appeals, Chair.
Number 2, is there any exempt items information, Harriet?
No exempt information, Chair.
Number 3, are there any late items?
There is one late item. The report to item 11, the response to the citizens' jury recommendations, was unavailable at the time of agenda publication and was published late. I'm hoping that all members have received the electronic notification of this item.
Great, yeah, I'm sure they have. Seeing
Thank you.
General nods. Excellent. Okay. So item 4, declarations of disclosable pecuniary interest. Any members got any of those? Let me switch to Zoom so I can see you all from my preamble. Nope. Good. So item 5, apologies, we've already covered Councillor Collins for Councillor Anderson.
Sorry, Chair, just also to add that Neil Evans has also sent us apologies for today's meeting.
Right, no worries. Thank you very much. So item 6, colleagues, it's the minutes of our last meeting on 17th of July, which is pages 5 to 8 in your pack. Now, I'm not going to go through the minutes page by page, but if members could cast your eyes over them, is there any matters arising, or anyone could, and then if there's no matters arising, can we move them as a true record of the meeting? Are we good? Speak up if anyone wants to raise anything. If not, true
Hi,
record.
Chair. Apologies.
Yep. Sure.
Just read the beginning. Is that the meeting I was here for? I believe that's the first meeting I was at. It mentions you welcoming me, but I'm not listed as present.
Ah, well, we can amend that. You were indeed there.
I think that's the meeting I'm thinking of.
Yeah, you were definitely there.
Apologies, Councillor Carlill. I'll amend that.
That's good. So, true record, folks. We're happy with that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Silence is approval in our Zoom world. Okay. So that's the minutes we've, and I think Councillor Wadsworth has joined us. Councillor Wadsworth, can you put your camera
Eventually,
on?
I have, yes.
Could you introduce yourself to the world, please, as part of our protocol? Elected members have to.
Let me find the camera thing. I've had a bit of trouble joining, so didn't seem to work. I'm Councillor Paul Wadsworth. Now, I notice again that my name is spelled incorrectly, so something's going to have to be done with that tomorrow.
If you click on your picture, there's the
Neil,
three dots.
Yeah, just carry on with the meeting because I've had a lot of hassle. So I'll sort it in the morning.
I sense this is a delicate area. We will move on, Paul. That's fine.
Yeah.
No, that's quite all right. Right, so item 7, open forum. So as this is a remote meeting, we have asked that members of the public submit videos of their open forum questions or statements. Before which today's video submissions, we've also got a live one. I would like to let you know, it's going to be one of those meetings. I've been in meetings all day. My throat is so dry. I'd like to let you know about changes that we've been making to the selection process for these videos. So to make it as fair as possible, well, we want to make it as fair as possible. And to date, slots for the open forum have always been allocated on a first come, first served basis. But from the next meeting onwards, we'll be choosing the video submitted at random with priority given to those who have not submitted in the last 6 months. So to shake things up and get more people interested. So I hope that's okay with folks. Right, so our first video is in ways the Youth Strike for Climate area, if you will.
Hi, I'm Cherry Tucker, age 14, and I'm representing Leeds Youth Strike. We're the next generation and are going to be most affected by any decisions made over the next few years. They will make or break our future. This is why we're coming to you about the Leeds Clean Air Zone. Air pollution is at an all-time low because of lockdown, where no one has been driving, etc. This is a worldwide trend. Air pollution has dropped because of lockdowns and is going to rise again when everyone is travelling as normal. Because of the pandemic, use of public transport is also down, and when school resumes, there will be an increase in car drop-offs. And since no one can car share, this will be even worse. It is no longer good enough to scrape just below the legal limit. Leeds used to have an aspiration to be the best city in the country. What happened to that? This is not about doing what we have to do, the bare minimum, but about doing what is right. It is a fundamental human right to breathe clean and fresh air. People deserve to know there is an alternative. Children deserve to have properly developed lungs with no conditions caused by air pollution. It causes massive health problems and 350 preventable deaths per year. The same vehicles polluting our air are also driving the climate crisis, which of course is another public health crisis. Polluting traffic should be viewed as a threat to our health due to both air pollution and carbon emissions, and we should use every tool in the box to get it off the road. As such, the climate impact should also be included in the review of the Clean Air Zone scheme. Air pollution also increases COVID vulnerability, and we should be doing everything we can to reduce risk from this virus, when more than enough lives have already been lost to it. You cannot sit there and tell us all of those lives do not matter. We want to build a better world, and it isn't just about the environment, it's about valuing individual human life. We should be making life as easy as possible. The way forward is with compassion, family, and community first, and that starts by caring for the most vulnerable people in our society. It is an injustice that they are once again being attacked and hurt by a preventable problem. Why should we scrap the Clean Air Zone now, when most of the money has already been spent on cameras and grants for businesses, and taxi drivers have spent thousands upgrading cars to fit with regulations to protect the people of this city? Think about that number again. 350 deaths per year that you can stop. The health impacts of current and predicted pollution and emission levels should form the basis of the Clean Air Zone review. Furthermore, In line with our above points, we want the Council to provide air pollution levels with the accompanying health risks, publicly available and easy to find and understand. Citizens have a right to know how they are being affected by the lack of action. There comes a time when silence becomes betrayal. Martin Luther King.
Thank you to Councillor Walshaw for his response to our earlier query. As a committee with a strategic role, surely SEAC has a responsibility to make sure that all decisions relating to the climate emergency are evidence-led. The Plans panel members and the public have the right and the duty to know the facts. If it cannot do this, how can SEAC say that it is an independent source of advice to the Council? SEAC must ensure that there is an independent, factual and publicly available assessment of what the expansion would mean for Leeds City Council's climate commitments without giving an opinion over whether the application should be accepted. We can't predict exactly the emissions from the airport, but we can assess what different scenarios, particularly one where annual passenger numbers reach 7 million, would mean for our commitments. Much of this information is already available, and we've heard that there's a few climate scientists at the University of Leeds to help out. We've known about the greenhouse effect since the 19th century, and that man-made climate change was a threat since the 1980s, but rich and powerful companies peddled lies and denial and stopped action for a generation. We couldn't afford this 40 years, and now the world is burning, from the USA to Australia to the Arctic to the Amazon, releasing more and more greenhouse gases in the process. It's time we took the advice of the millions of young people who have marched for climate justice. Listen to the science.
I'm Amelia. I'm Amelia.
Hi, I'm Brannock.
We're from Roundhay School.
And we're really proud that our school is the first in Yorkshire to declare a climate emergency.
The main impacts of climate change that we will see as the temperatures continue to rise are that more of the world's population will be exposed to extreme weather events. So that can include heat waves, storms, more flooding as sea levels rise. We'll also see an increase in drought, which has important implications for our ability to grow food. been amazing to see how the citizens of Leeds have really supported the need for action on the climate emergency. And there are decisions that we can all make in our everyday lives to try and help. But absolutely, we need higher level support in terms of national and regional governments making decisions in terms of infrastructure investment that support the actions of the citizens. Otherwise, everything that people are doing could be for nothing.
Climate change is a material consideration in all planning decision making, and there are multiple sources for this. First, the Paris Agreement, an international obligation, the Council's core strategy, especially planning policy SP12, paragraph 148 of the National Planning Policy Framework, the statutory obligations under the Climate Change Act 2008, this legislation is referred to in the framework, and this now requires net zero by 2050. This is reflected in Leeds City Council's Climate Emergency Declaration, by the climate emergency declared by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and the Leeds Carbon Roadmap articulates the goal for Leeds to reach net zero by 2030, and the region's target is to be net zero by 2038 with significant progress by 2030.
When the council declared the climate emergency, it was really good because it made me feel like our voices were being heard, and it put a lot of faith back in the council that I didn't think I had before.
So over the 60-year period from 2024 to 2084, if this development goes ahead, the airport alone would exceed the entire carbon budget for the whole of Leeds. That expansion is completely incompatible with Leeds and the UK's binding net zero obligations.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important that the council sticks to their climate emergency because we've got a great opportunity here and we don't want to let that go to waste for our future and generations to come.
Our climate emergency involves many issues, one of which is the UK's alarming loss of biodiversity. England is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. Insects are the cornerstone of our environmental system, providing essential pollination, keeping the soil healthy, recycling nutrients, providing food for wildlife, and controlling pests, to say nothing of the beauty they provide. Relaxed mowing on grasslands throughout the UK has resulted in an astonishing turnaround of a previously headlong decline in a very short time. Leeds has also had some success in this area. Planting has become more wildlife friendly, with a consequent increase in pollinators, and some areas have been subject to relaxed mowing, which has had a huge positive effect on biodiversity and attracted much public support. We need to build on this. Many of Otley's grasslands are still mown regularly, rendering them sterile to wildlife. Here, a tiny unmown pocket contains 17 native plant species. Unfortunately, it's an isolated island. Any insects are trapped here as they can't traverse the distance to the next nectar spot. Our grasslands hold the key to restoring biodiversity throughout the town. Properly managed and restored, they will provide linked wildlife corridors to restore our valuable wildlife. Here, a narrow margin has been mown, allowing the wildlife to proliferate, whilst affording a wide enough path for social distancing. A small, mown verge clearly indicates that this has been purposely managed and is not simply the result of neglect. Here, roadside verges are devoid of life. There are no line-of-sight issues for traffic, and relaxed mowing here would provide valuable habitat. More extensive grasslands in Otley would benefit from swathes of central or peripheral land being left to wildlife, which benefits the local residents too. So why Otley? After all, Otley already has some beautiful green spaces around it. Firstly, a network of wildlife corridors is both feasible throughout the town and will work. Secondly, we have considerable evidence of public opinion in favour of this. Also, our experienced voluntary organisations give us a supply of volunteers who are keen to work with Leeds Council to help create corridors and restore biodiversity. Areas can be properly surveyed before and after to establish the increase in biodiversity and to inform subsequent management. This can serve as a template to develop other biodiverse areas within Leeds. Here is one of Otley's grasslands 8 days after mowing. It cannot support even a small insect population and turns to mud in the rain. Yes, there remains a minority who do prefer their grass to be neat and tidy. This minority, however, is reducing as public understanding of climate change and support for wildlife are escalating. We now need to ask the question, can we afford to sacrifice our flora and fauna to neat and tidy? Establishing wildlife corridors is a win-win situation for the wildlife, for the humans, for the council, which can save valuable resources as a result, and for the climate. Thank you for listening.
Excellent. Oh, I really like Open Forum. I think those videos were really good and gave us a lot of food for thought. So as we do as in our common practices, I as chair will make sure that the contributors get a proper detailed response from the council and interested parties and stakeholders. And it's food for thought for future CIAC items as well, for work that we want to undertake. So returning to my, it was my mistake, we actually don't have a verbal contributor to Open Forum. So just for people watching, we don't usually take questions and points raised at this point from elected members because we have a considerable workload to do during these meetings, and in a Zoom environment we try to keep our business moving. So if we could then go to agenda item 8, which is the working groups update, which is from Polly Cook. Polly?
Yeah. So if I go through each of the 3 groups in turn, and we haven't re-established the working group since lockdown, but the plan is that in October we will set up the kind of the next meeting of each of the 3 groups, and just pull together kind of an outline work programme. So if I start with the food and biodiversity group, so to date the group has focused very much on biodiversity. And at the request of the chair, Councillor Collins, the next session will be focused on how we wrap everything that's been done to date up and we pull together the various different aspects of biodiversity. And then also it will be timely because that will be the point when we need to look at the White Rose Forest strategy, which will be going to November's exec board. So it will give us a real opportunity to have a session on biodiversity. But I think probably following on from the presentation that we're going to hear today, not wishing to preempt, but I think we'll probably kind of see that there are lots of opportunities around food, and actually there's probably an opportunity after that to then move on to food and start looking at the actions that can come out of it and pulling together a work programme that focuses more on that aspect of the group. So I'm hoping to get those invites out to members towards the end of October. In terms of the planning and energy efficiency, again, the focus very much today has been on planning, and there is currently a planning white paper in the system that we're drafting a response to. The suggestion is that we issue that draft response to the members of the planning working group so that they can comment via email in order to meet the timetable for the final meeting when that draft response will be signed off, so they can input into that final working group. And then again, we think it's probably timely to move on to energy efficiency and start looking at domestic energy efficiency policy and commercial energy efficiency policy over the meetings remaining for this year. In terms of transport, we did actually have a meeting during lockdown, and we talked about bringing back some kind of examples of really good walking strategies. And I think that's probably still timely to do. And also looking at the work that's going on with school streets and the active travel neighbourhoods under one heading.
Yep.
And then also looking at transport strategy that again will come to exec board, and using it as an opportunity to get wider input and consultation before it goes to exec board. So that's the plan for the future kind of work programme. We're looking to get a meeting set up for each of those 3 groups in October. We tend to meet kind of once every 2 months, but it may depend if there's specific things that we need to tie into exec board programmes, or things that come out of meetings such as this, then obviously we'll try and be flexible. So that's my update.
Excellent. Okay. Anybody got any questions or points of order to raise for Polly? Obviously, we've wanted to get the working groups moving and a groove in now. Things I was about to say.
Can I come in, Chair?
Lockdown, but no, we're not really. Councillor Blackburn.
Just one thing. I mean, I'm not criticising us not having any meetings during lockdown. It's been bad enough trying to get the main committees in a council working properly during that period. But don't you think that we need to put some, and I'm appreciative of officers' time, don't you think we need to put a bit more effort into getting back on schedule? Because quite clearly we've lost 6 months.
I think that's kind of what Polly's highlighting, isn't it? The fact that we are getting back on schedule. But yes, it's not been the easiest year so far for the last 6 months for everybody. But I mean, the thing to remember, members, is that whilst there has been an interruption in the ordinary business of council, the council's not been on furlough. Work's been continuing, whether it's planning work. I mean, we've done an awful lot of work looking at the local plan review, and bear in mind, folks, the local plan review has climate emergency at its very core. So there's an awful lot of work been going on. So, but yeah, I mean, we need to bring all that to the various working groups, David, so they can be responded to, and members can get sight of everything and contribute as they rightly should do. So yeah, we will get on with things. And so Polly will be circulating all the details of all the working groups to members. And also bear in mind, to your respective political groups, please bear in mind that we said at the start, setting up CX, whilst there is a membership to the full committee that you can all see playing Celebrity Squares today, the working groups are open to all elected members of council. And I think there's such a diversity of experience within us as councillors that if people could, get other members of their group to come along to the ones that they're interested in, I said come along, to join in, please do so. There is a breadth of experience that we really want to tap into as a council. So that's working groups. If no one's getting, Councillor Buckley, of course.
Yes, there's a few.
Councillor Collins,
hands
no
up
worries.
there.
Am I not seeing the hands popping up? Hang on a minute. Anyway, Councillor Buckley first, then Councillor Collins, then Councillor Bentley.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to bring up transport, if I could.
Yep.
Which obviously Polly touched on, and just a couple of things there. Obviously, from 6 months ago, the situation with transport could not be more different if we'd thought about it. And from a situation of wanting an increase in patronage on buses and trains, particularly buses, we've just got into an opposite situation where we're completely at the opposite end of the spectrum. And I suspect that as things, well, I hope relax slightly over the next 6 months rather than the previous 6 months, it will give us an opportunity to find out what can be done about public transport to get those patronage figures going up in the right direction eventually. And just secondly, and this is just a question really as to how we're going to monitor things. With the cycling and walking schemes which have been installed or are going to be, there's been quite a bit of national controversy about some schemes which have apparently actually contributed to more pollution and so on. And I just wanted to make sure that we were definitely robust about monitoring this so that we don't end up achieving the opposite to what we actually set out to do.
Okay, yeah, I mean, noted. I mean, rather than going to launch into a long debate here, because we've got members, members of the public wanting to contribute in these various sections, take note of your transport issues raised, Neil, and get back to you on those. I think, yeah, there's an awful lot going on, particularly with regards to active travel and cycle schemes. I haven't come across any cycle schemes making the situation worse, but if you've got ones to offer up to me as chair, and Polly can look at it as my lead officer, then by all means we will do, and transport colleagues as well. Is that okay? Yeah. I'm just rather than going down the rabbit hole of multiple debates, colleagues, we are on a Zoom meeting and I want to keep it to about 2 hours, and we've got a lot to hear from. So, Councillor Collins.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to support Polly really to mode, but I'm hoping there'll be a lot of positives that will come out of that, not just a full stop.
Good. I agree that we
make and probably have a discussion about that specifically at some point. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, no, we can do that. We need to respond in detail, but yeah. Councillor Illingworth.
Yes, very briefly, Chair. Just to say, a written timetable from Polly would be much appreciated to make it easier for us to plan ahead to make sure we turn up for these things.
Oh, don't worry, folks. We'll all be emailed out in some detail. Councillor Bentley and Councillor Illingworth, you still got your hands up, so put them down. Thank you. Right. Okay. Right, next I want to move on to item 9, which is the Climate Action Fund and the community projects in Leeds. So rather than listen to a preamble on this rather excellent work from myself, I think I'll hand over to Paul Chatterton. Paul, do you want to introduce yourself and talk to us? That'd be great.
Hi everyone, delighted to be here. Thanks for the time. I'm one of the people who helped to create an organisation of Leeds called Our Future Leeds, and we've over the last 18 months been creating a citizen-led response to the climate emergency, and we helped to submit an application to the National Lottery, and we won. So I've got a short PowerPoint presentation I'd like to talk through with you, because this is a really big deal for Leeds, and we absolutely want to put Leeds City Council and officers and elected members at the heart of what we're doing. So I've sent to Harriet a PowerPoint presentation. I could share my screen if somebody makes me a co-host.
You should be able to do it now, Paul. Do you have the share screen button at the bottom of your screen?
Great stuff.
Brilliant.
Yeah, doing it right now. Okay, so look, this is the presentation. Brilliant. It's about 2 hours long. I'll take about 10 minutes, yeah, and then we'll have some questions.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's not a lecture. Oh, yeah, not an online lecture. So here we are, the climate emergency.
Are you sure?
Action, yeah, promise you. Community Action Programme. So that's our working title. We'll get a better title as we start this. So there's what is this, and what does it mean for us and you? It's major news for Leeds. We won. We applied to the National Lottery's Climate Action Programme. There were several hundred initial expressions of interest, got down to 60. We got down to the last 5. And they funded about a dozen projects of various sizes. We were one of, I think, 2 or 3 which were funded at this incredible level of £2.5 million. So we've just brought £2.5 million to the City of Leeds over the next 5 years. We're absolutely delighted to have done this, and we spent the almost entirety of the pre and just after lockdown period writing this 90-page application, which I do want to send to all your committee members. So I'll send that via Harriet so you can have a look at the detailed application, because there's a heck of a lot of detail here, and I certainly don't want to take time off of this committee meeting. So there's 5 lead partners, which I'm going to mention, for over 4 work packages, but there's 40 new posts here. There's going to be a heck of a lot of people working on this across the city. Across when we're fully up and running, 16 community hubs, dispensing £400,000 of direct community grants to tackle what we call the climate and social justice emergencies, yeah, and it's all based around what we're calling this Leeds Climate Round Table, which we want to create and get everyone involved in. So it's based on Leeds' strengths, because obviously we're walking on the shoulders of giants here. There's a huge amount of stuff happening right over our city, and I won't go into, there's a snapshot there of the amazing stuff happening. And why we're doing this, many of the things why this committee exists is exactly why we're doing this, yeah? Everything from Youth Strike to Greta Thunberg to the scientific reports behind the COP15 and the IPCC reports, Extinction Rebellion, but also the declarations by local authorities, which have been cascading across the world, right? With 2/3 of local authorities now in the UK declaring climate emergencies. A really exciting period to be in. So look, we've got 5 lead partners, one not appointed at the moment. So Voluntary Action Leeds is our local trusted partner. So they were the main applicant. So we're really privileged to have Voluntary Action Leeds in our city, right, who can lead these kinds of bids. Leeds Tidal, they're running a big work package, but Leeds Tidal, if you don't know them, they really specialise on, they stand for Trading, Justice and Development at Leeds. They really focus on issues of global justice and social justice. Really great stuff they're doing. And Together for Peace, you might know them from things like the Poverty Truth Commission, and ourselves, Our Future Leeds, who's a citizens network. And the coming soon one is we're going to commission somebody to run the learning work package, yeah, which we're now up and running. So we've just started in September. So literally the 5 years has just started now. But we've got a huge support base. Here's, you know, a snapshot almost of our broader support base, people who supported and helped develop our application. Because as you know, in Leeds, we've got a massive support base of social, environmental and community-based groups who are doing amazing stuff, transforming the city across the research, business, community and public sectors. So look, our approach, it's science informed. We know this is a climate emergency. We don't have to go into it too much, but we know there's a 10, 12-year challenge. We must get to some kind of zero carbon balance by the 2030s to hold global temperatures to no more than 1.5 degrees, right, of global warming above pre-industrial level. That's a massive task, and to do it in a socially just way through climate justice, right, ensuring equality for all. So this is a mammoth task. We know our carbon budget as a city, right? We know it's 40 million tonnes. We know we're eating it into it at a rate of 4 million tonnes a year. We know that our budget will be spent in the next 7 or 8 years if we don't take emergency action, right? So this is why your committee exists, because we need to create a new reason for Leeds to exist, a new development model we can all get behind to give us a safe and just future. A lot of this is about building power back in communities who feel very disempowered with many things and engaging from where they are right now. But a lot of it's going to be about testing and learning. What solutions do we need to make this humongous turn of events? None of us know exactly how we'd be doing it. So there's a real test and learn project. And there's a movement building aspect here that we need to mobilize the city. There's 700,000 people in this city mobilized behind this agenda. And we want to really try to embed with you some deeper levels of democracy and understanding. Some of the stuff we did in the climate jury, right? In terms of how do we mobilize a large city behind this? Transformative, and I must stress transformative and not piecemeal action, because piecemeal action won't get us over the hurdle over the next dozen years. I'm not going to speak to this slide, but just so you know, we've done some thinking, and there's 5 work packages. You see WP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They all have different aims and different outcomes. But the big goal at the top, look, we want to create a really connected, informed city based around these community. Our bud is based around creating these community hubs, right? Which can take effective action, support communities to take effective action on the climate emergency to create a more just, fair and green Leeds by the 2030s. And we want these community hubs to be really well networked and supported. And they all kind of create their own individual community action plans in their own right, which join together to create a bigger city plan. Yeah, that is our aim. Cross-sector, community embedded, and it speaks to the evidence agenda. It all fits together in a perfect way, or at least to start with. And so we all play all the different work packages I've mentioned play different roles, and you can read much more about this in the full application. I'm really happy to talk to groups of you together, individuals. What might this mean for your patch at different times? So you can certainly just drop me an email. I'll certainly be delighted to talk to you all. Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of ways this works, but the essential parts of it, there's a big package on training. So we're developing a training capacity to kind of co-learn on the climate emergency. We're developing these community hubs, how people can get involved on their patch, and we're going to have a big city centre hub, right, which is almost kind of the mothership, which is going to develop the resources down there. And then we're going to create this kind of city climate justice plan. And all this comes together in what we call the city round table, yeah, where different sectors can come together and meet and share, right, across all this. And then we're going to have a partnership board, a climate assembly, round table, as I mentioned. We're going to have a scrutiny panel. So there's lots going on, lots of eyes on this, lots of discussion, lots of building in democracy, yeah. I'm not going to go, so what we want to achieve in 5 years, certainly, you know, the headline is zero carbon, socially just livable Leeds, yeah? Well-connected citizenry. Active communities that can really take on this change agenda, yeah? And a really working partnership and hoping, replicating, sharing, learning right across Leeds, West Yorkshire, you name it. There's some more detail on the work package here, which I'm not going to go into, but just, you know, for the headlines, work package 1's voluntary action Leeds, work package 2 is our future Leeds, work package 3 is Together for Peace, work package 4 is Tidal. What they're going to do is interesting because they're going to work with community, so with campaign and sector groups, so be it housing, energy, finance, you name it. They're going to start to build capacity in those areas and get them out to communities and vice versa, yeah? So that's going to be a really important aspect of it. An evaluation to be appointed. So look, that's it. So that's a whistle-stop tour through 90-page application and 5-year programme of work. But we want you to know about it from day one because you're essential to our success. So over to you, Chair, for questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was very impressive. I can see why you're successful. There's a lot of breadth and depth and scope to that. Do we got any questions for Paul to start with then? Councillor Mulheron, yep. And then Councillor Buckley.
Sorry, mine's not really a question, more of a comment. I supported the bids to National Lottery Fund, wrote a letter of support on behalf of myself and the council. And I had an interview with one of the panel that was making decisions over the funding. And they were very, very impressed with the work that we'd already done with the citizens jury in Leeds and the approach that we'd taken there of trying to work with and engage Leeds citizens, so rather than doing 2 or 4, working with people. So I think that's a very key part of the success here, that approach of working in local communities and kind of building up that grassroots movement. So it is a leap of faith for us as councillors, and I think that's fair to say, but I think it's one that kind of builds on our work, our restorative approach that we have in the city, working with communities. And I think it's a really exciting opportunity for us to more widely with people in the city on this agenda and to get ideas from local communities and work with local communities to develop those and, as Paul has said, to test out and learn what we can do across the city.
I completely agree. It's really strong. So I've got Councillors Buckley, Ray and Collins. So Neil first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One of the great things about sitting on this committee is that you learn phrases from time to time that you've never heard before. And it's a process of education. And I just wanted to ask Paul, what is deep democracy?
Right, well, we'll have a session on that. That's fantastic. I mean, I suppose what we're looking at is how do we go beyond representative democracy? We've got it and engage more people in decision making, the things that affect their lives. Yeah, and so what mechanisms can we establish at a sub-ward level, a community level, where people can engage more effectively with you as ward representatives? Things like the citizens' juries, things like popular assemblies, things like participatory budgeting, other mechanisms through which people feel empowered to gain trust in their elected representatives, engage in the formal political process. And I must say, just the one way I've locked this in as well is one thing I had forgot, which I had to mention, is we're seconding a member of Polly's team to the programme 1 day a week for 5 years. So there's a real lock in there of staff. So we're looking forward to working with you on that formal basis.
Oh, that's excellent, because that's similar to where we work with the Climate Commission, and that's been very successful. So that's excellent. Okay, Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Jen. Actually, it's a very similar question from Councillor Buckley's, and I've raised this committee before. It's how you reach those disenfranchised groups that actually don't want to participate. Not necessarily don't want, that's the wrong phrase. Have significant other concerns that actually mean they won't participate because of those concerns. And I suppose it goes to that deep democracy. I mean, obviously, there's a feeling from this that actually something needs to change to make this happen, to engage some of the most disenfranchised groups, which many of the people on this committee represent. I suppose what's your initial, I suppose it's going to be a bit of a contentious question, where do you think we failed? as an initial question, to think that we actually need to reevaluate and look at this and change that method of engagement. Because obviously, to say we need to have a deeper democracy says there's a feeling of failure somewhere. And what do you think is the essence of that?
Well, I don't think there's anything different done in Leeds than the general UK situation. I think there's an element of rebuilding trust between the public and any kind of elected citizen, yeah, and even like board members of private or public corporations, yeah. And I think it's just rebuilding that trust is the key thing. And I think it's about, for me, there's one key thing here, right? It's about narrowing the evidence action gap, because what people are aware of is that here's the evidence, here's what we're doing, doesn't match. So I think we need to be much more honest about what we need to do. That's how you build trust, because at a local level, you get that, right? You'd say, look, what you're asking me to do doesn't meet the challenge. So being honest about the task at hand, but also we need to embark on a popular planning process in the city, right? Where we develop our plans in a much more participatory way. I'm not going to beat us up for the way we design these, because that's been given to us through various historical legislations. But you know, I think what can we do to supercharge this beyond what we've already got as a baseline? I think that's where, and I'd love to engage with you all more on what we could do, you know, outside this squeeze time we've got together. But you know, Paul, the stuff that you're doing on Twitter and you know is exemplar of how you do extra stuff to reach out to the population within a geographical community. Yeah.
Good answer. No, that's really helpful, Paul. Councillor Ray does do some very, very good work on social media. Councillor Collins.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Mine's along the same lines again, really. I think everybody listening in today or attending this meeting today is on board and appreciates that there is a serious issue that we've got to work with or work towards solving. In my ward in Horsforth, I would say at the moment that the majority are not disengaged, but aren't really focused on this. We have public meetings. Councillor Shemmel-Taylor and I do have public meetings when there are issues such as developing greenbelt sites and things, but we still get a large percentage of people who don't really see it as a major issue. For example, we've got an issue at the moment where officers today brought forward plans for Horsforth Hall Park, and they were planning to put trees in the majority of our open spaces. Now, as somebody on this panel, I can't see a problem with that, but I know from talking to my residents that if we did anything like that to a Victorian park, there would be a lot of people who'd be very upset about it. So my sort of plea to Paul is, how can your group work with councillors like myself to gradually bring people on board and to gradually show them that we do need to do more and more within the city? Because if we use this word democracy and we went out for a vote today, I think a lot of the things that the group here and Paul's support groups would want would get voted down. It's somehow, how do we improve this? How do we improve the change? How do we improve people's perception of what the reality actually is? Without lecturing them, without forcing things down their throat. We've got to bring more people on board somehow. So even if it's just consultation on the park in Horsforth, how can we actually improve that and bring people to accept that we do need more relaxed mowing and more trees?
I think that deserves a longer answer than we've got time for. So you know, but headlines there, I think I go back to this idea of a deeper popular planning process where people are feel involved, not just in like responding to suggestions, but also being involved in that co-creating those suggestions. Yeah, and I think starting from the lived experience of where people are at, I think is a key thing today. So the popular education process that the jury went through, remember the climate jury. Within 9 weeks, they were pretty satisfied with how they understood the issues and therefore came up with a basket of solutions appropriate to that challenge. Keeps coming back to say popular planning process where you match the challenge to the solutions, to the actions you're proposing, and people will get it. If you start throwing out actions without clarifying to them what the challenge is, they just think they're being told what to do. But it's like what you would do in your own household around the kitchen table. You'd say, the sinks bust, what we're going to do, you know, name the challenge and respond with an appropriate solution, you know, and people will get on board with it. So I think we need to do a little bit more of that telling the truth thing as you know, why did we all get involved in politics or community activism? Yeah, it's because we want to use serious public policy mechanisms to change the world for good. So it's about being proud about that and taking that to these public meetings. And this is why we're proposing these changes, because international, national governments tell us these big crises and crikey, we've got to do this on our patch. And it takes a while, right? Because we've lived through decades of people being misinformed and distracted and busy and all that kind of stuff. So we haven't got any magic solutions, but we're going to have a great 5-year crack at it.
Can I come back, Chair?
Briefly.
Yeah, I think my concern is it's the cart before the horse, chicken and egg scenario, isn't it? I agree with what you're saying regarding we need the policies, but to get public support, so the majority are demanding those policy changes, is what I would like to do first. So that's where the education and the communication on the ground to everybody in our town or city has got to happen as soon as possible. And I think those people who do see the headlines, who do find it's of interest to them, have picked up that there is a serious concern. But it's those ones that priority is getting the kids to school, their jobs and everything else that I'm just a little bit worried about.
Thanks, Councillor Collins. Now, look, this is in no way criticism of any speakers in this panel, but we have an awful lot to go through. And there are, as Paul said, this is a 5-year process. There's an awful lot we can talk about for future sessions, for other meetings. I mean, one of the benefits of the Zoom era, oh God, I've called it an era, that makes it longer, is that we can organise things quite easily. And I'd be very happy to chair and facilitate any further sessions we need on this, folks. There's a lot to go at. So with brevity in mind, I've got everyone who's got their hands up, I've got you down, so don't worry. But with brevity in mind, Councillor Bentley?
Thank you, Jazz. You know, brevity is my middle name.
Oh absolutely.
I think we're all probably thinking around the same issues, and I'll try and pitch it in perhaps a different way. What I was so pleased with seeing that presentation is it was community based. It was something that had gone out and sort of bottom up, for want of a better word. Which is great. The other thing is, I remember this committee, and unless I'm missing something tremendous, I didn't know this was going on. So here was an issue, and I've got no problem with that. You know, a group starting up doing stuff, that's great. So my real question to Paul, I think, is what value does the council add to your project?
What value does the council add? Well, I mean, listen, you're the massive municipal power that guides and steers and regulates 700,000 people. Like, you are the key to our future. Like, your elected representatives, you have regulatory power over a whole bunch of stuff that make people's lives better. You can create a narrative about what's the future of a city, what are we here for, right? The Leeds has developed over hundreds of years because there's been a municipal authority that wanted to shape this thing called Leeds, right? So, like, you can create conversations, you can marshal resources, you can talk to the government, you can sit in a combined authority. I mean, that's what you are. I mean, you make major public policy decisions and have democratic debates between people of different political and same views. So you're you know,
okay. Yeah. Can I come back briefly, Chair, on this?
Yeah, go on then.
Yeah. I know that's what we can do, and that's our power. But I mean, do we actually do that? That's what I'm really asking. You have set up this initiative from scratch on your own. I know you probably got a bit of endorsement. You got a nice letter from Councillor Mulheron, but it was what you did, and I'm just wondering whether all those power things you say the council have, whether they are really that useful, and whether you could be driving this as a community. And it comes really back to the sort of things that Councillor Collins and Councillor Buckley and Councillor Ray were saying, in terms of where are the people in this. We can do things We can do things to people, or we could do things with people. And all those power things you were talking about is about us doing things to people. I may not be expressing that very well, but I think there's a huge transfer of power, if you like, that could be established to community initiatives like this. I'll leave it at that for brevity, Chair. We could probably talk about it for a long time.
Yeah, I think as Paul's just answered really succinctly and well, I mean, having the legal powers to do many things is always essential to how a city operates. Consider yourself part of the glue, Councillor Bentley, in how an 800-year-old city like Leeds operates. Councillor Misley.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, I think the community hubs are a great idea.
Yeah.
I think we need to take quite an abstract concept for many people. If we can bring it locally and find a way to involve different groups for different reasons. So, you know, even if you're looking at small groups like Brownies, all the way through to older community gardening allotment groups, there's something for everybody that can get involved in climate change. And I suppose as ward members, it's our job to contribute by engaging people at a local level, to find some way to hook people in. And there will be something, we've just got to help facilitate it. So no, I think it's brilliant.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's going to be fantastic. But it's making this, making something abstract quite real to people, what matters to their day-to-day lives. And I think that's super important. Councillor Blackburn and then Councillor Shazad.
I'll do. That's it. Got me mute off. I think this was a very encouraging paper, this report that you've just done. Certainly, Paul can expect an email from me shortly inviting him to come and talk to our group about that, about what he's trying to do. But I think what might well be needed is some engagement with community committees. I mean, that is the lowest tier of our council, and it is something we try, and I say try, we try to involve our communities through that. And I think that may be the tier we need to direct some of this through. So if Paul could speak to some of the community committees, that would be good.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a good idea. And also it's a case of having a regular update item with us here, going forward over the next few years. I think that'd be excellent. Okay, last one on this item, Councillor Shazad.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I would like to first of all thank Paul and the rest of his team, yourself as Chair, and Councillor Lisa Mulheron for getting this through and for getting the funding for Leeds City Council. I think that's great for this project. And as far as the local hubs are concerned, I think the idea of getting your local Bloom groups involved, plus your faith groups involved, and like Councillor Blackburn said, that could be probably done through the community committees. And the thing is, the issue is not so much in the wards that are kind of well off. It's in the wards, for example, if you take Kipton and High Hills, they've got a really good now in Bloom group, and they're looking at things, but they think that the council sometimes are doing things such as pollution, like a certain project has increased the pollution in an area, so they feel disenfranchised, whereas they think in the areas, for example, the area I represent in Moortown, people are very happy with the idea of extra planting trees because they see everything is working in their benefit. I think it's getting it through to those working class people on the lower incomes, the ones that are most in need of this environment as well. Because if you go the further out you go, the environment is a lot better, like in Councillor Buckley's area. So I think that community engagement is really important, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with Paul. And like Councillor Paul Ray said, we do need to have a mixed opinion on this, just a bit like the citizens climate committee that was organised, so everybody gets a say and nobody feels disenfranchised. Thank you for that, Chair, and sorry if I waffled on a bit too much.
No, not at all. It's interesting because we've got wards, like a lot of our inner wards, like I represent, that are still dealing with the consequences of the 19th century, let alone the 20th. So I think it's important we have these different projects, different roles, and different education efforts as well. Although, to be fair, I think a lot of people in my ward would absolutely lap up everything that Paul's talked about today. I think this is a project with Headingley and Hyde Park stamped all over it, so we'll be looking to be very much involved. Right, That's been really helpful, Paul. Really appreciate that. Obviously, you'd heard a lot from members. Officers will have taken notes on everything that's come up. I think obviously this is the next step, and it's an early step in a long process. We'll be working together. I'm really looking forward to it as other members of SEAC. I think, yeah, a regular sort of standing item update. We'll sort out the logistics and the practicalities of all of this, but it is fantastic. And again, and well done for being successful. It's such a huge opportunity for Leeds, and you're most welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting. But if you disappear, we won't think ill of you. Everyone does a lot of Zoom meetings, but you know, stay if you want. Right, so just let me get to my agenda, folks. So agenda item 10, so sustainable food systems. So this is pages 11 and 12 in your pack. So we've got some excellent speakers for this. So we've got Paola, Tom, Sonia, and Andy Goldring from the Permaculture Association. And I've not mentioned your organisation, so if you want to just introduce yourselves and where you're from, that would be great. And then how you do things is up to you, folks.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Tom Bliss, and I'll be leading the presentation. Actually, three of us have been involved in what Paul was just talking about, and there's actually quite a lot of crossover here. Some of you know me already. I know Councillor Garthwaite. I'm on the Leeds Parks and Green Spaces Forum Committee, so there's a big overlap between the food and the biodiversity, etc. I'm chair of Feed Leeds, and I'm also a teacher at Leeds Beckett University, landscape architecture. And until recently, I reported to Piers Forster about the whole tree thing at University of Leeds. I do some other things as well. Sonia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sonia Woodcock. I'm the coordinator of Foodwise Leeds and also a knowledge exchange fellow for the NH at the university. And yeah, I was alongside Paul in the development of this bid, and the crossovers between food and environment, it's just a really fantastic opportunity, and we look forward to working across the city.
And if I could introduce Paola, who's our lead researcher and who's actually written this document.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I am Paula Sakai, and I am a UKRI Research and Innovation Fellow working at the University of Leeds. And in my fellowship in the last 2 years and something, I have been developing tools and trying to see how Leeds can increase its climate resilience. So I'm really, really happy to be here, and we have been working in several things, and yeah, like with the work that Paul it's about to start, I think it will join very, very nicely in this. Thank you.
It looks like Andy Goldring hasn't managed to make it. He said he was going to join us later on. He may turn up in the middle. Now I'm going to try this. If it's all right with you, Chair, I'm going to share my screen and open up a presentation. See if it works. So if I do this, which is just coming now, and then this. Okay, I did try this the other day. So if I give you, let me see. No, that's not the right one. What are you seeing there? You should actually be seeing a different screen there. Are you seeing the main output of the PowerPoint there? You are. Good. Okay. So
yeah, we are. Good.
Good. All right. So you have there some of the organisations behind this policy brief, and the four of us. But there's actually a lot more people involved in this. Hopefully, if I click on this, it should move on to the next. Here we go. And I'm just going to start with a quotation from Tim Benton, who's also involved, although not directly in this part of the process. Governments and local authorities have not tended to see food as a public good, so have left provision largely to the private sector and market forces. But the COVID pandemic has shown just how vulnerable cities are, and while Leeds coped magnificently on this occasion, the lockdown sounded a klaxon for the looming challenge of Brexit and, more alarmingly, climate change, which is already putting global food production and distribution under threat, while also demanding reductions in carbon emissions, plastics and waste. Now is the time to look at the evidence and introduce robust measures to ensure a resilient, sustainable and benign food supply for the citizens of Leeds, and Leeds City Council needs to be front and centre of that effort. So these are this is the summary. We'll come back to these in a moment, but this is what we found, that a resilient, healthy and sustainable food supply should be viewed as a matter of public good, as it underpins public health, social equality and environmental equality. That's quite a big change. It's a bit of a sea change. It's just not been on the agenda really before. Leeds has plenty of farmland, expertise, innovation and excellent practice. And so minimal interventions could deliver major changes and benefits. We're not asking for lots of money here. We recommend that Leeds City Council sets up a high-profile task force led by a senior officer, that's important, to work with local stakeholders to create a local sustainable food brand, improve access to land for growers, strengthen economic measures to support a vibrant local food ecosystem, and promote education and skill development. So obviously we're doing this in the context of a climate emergency, but the point about food is it's completely based around plants. So we have to be aware of the wider issues as well. So it's not just climate change, it's what we would talk about, the planetary boundaries. This is from the Stockholm Resilience Centre. There's actually some more now which have been identified. We have to start thinking about keeping within those limits as well as the climate targets. It's worth just pointing out, in case you're not aware, that the 50% of food consumed in the UK is produced within this country, another 30% within the EU. So there's a question there around Brexit. And if you look at the comparison on the right between import and exports, you see that it's only beverage which where the UK supersedes exports with imports. So there's some quite interesting dichotomies in terms of looking at the global coming down to Leeds. What we've been doing, just to explain, we've been deliberately, for the sake of exercise, ignoring the national picture. We're going straight from global to local in order to really look at what the threats are. And of course, I don't need to remind you about the problem with food waste. A third of all food is wasted. And if food waste was a country, it would rank third behind the USA and China in terms of emissions. So that's a bit of an easy target, but actually delivering it's a little bit more complicated. Obviously, you're aware of the fact that most of the food that comes abroad is coming from very far away. There's a whole issue of food miles to be considered. And also the fact about bread baskets around the world. So there are some key areas around the world where a lot of the food is being produced. And this is something that we got from Tim. There's various times that some of those bread baskets have been under really severe threat, mainly from climate, but not only from climate. There's conflicts and other things as well. And sometimes there have been a few occasions when they've all or most of them been under threat at the same time. This really does start to set the alarm bells ringing. And when you add into that the fact that all of this food is being shuttled around the world by ship and by aircraft, that's all great. It says there, that graphic I found, a booming shipping network. But the work that Tim is involved with at Chatham House is particularly looking at what we call choke points. And these are the areas where there are possibilities of serious interruptions to supply. So you might get a problem with conflict or something like that in one area. And I remember Tim telling me that he was talking to some people in the food industry about how they bring their food around through the Suez Canal. He said, what happens if the Suez Canal is stopped? He said, oh, it's fine, we just go around Africa. He said, well, that'll introduce a 6-week delay into your supply chain. And at that point, that guy went a bit white because he realized that, you know, the situation is much more fragile than people realize. It's all good, but it might not be good very soon. So we've got to think about these. And of course, I don't need to remind you about the two big issues on the table, which really put a lens on this, or two lenses, Brexit and the pandemic. We've had a little bit of a wobble already because of COVID, and we haven't seen the end of it. This is, I think, the most important slide of all, which is one that I always use. Again, it came from Tim. This is the correlation between the price of food and food riots and unrest in the streets. And you see the red lines are where there have been people killed, and then the price of grain. And there's a direct correlation. So when people can't get food, they very quickly become very unhappy. Let's put it no stronger than that. This is the slide which really started our journey with Feed Leeds. It shows Woodhouse Moor shortly after World War II. And of course, we all remember the Dig for Victory. So we do know that you can produce a lot of food within cities because they did it not very long ago. Not necessarily going to go right back to that now, but it's worth bearing that in mind throughout what I'm going to say. But we've carried on all the way through. So the last 10 years, we've been doing a lot of work on this. So this is not something that's come out of the blue. We've been running our think tanks. We've been running various bits of research. We've looked into how much land we would need to actually feed Leeds. This is something that Andy did with the Permaculture Association. We did another exercise. Various students have done things at both universities. And the Leeds food strategy, which ran from 2006, elapsed in 2010. This is one of the major catalysts for starting on Feed Leeds and its subsequent organisations. So we've been through a process forming Feed Leeds. There was a deputation to council, which Sonia and Andy actually did in 2014. Then we did the Leeds food audit, which was commissioned by the council. And the result of that, we formed the Leeds Food Partnership. And then we've gone on, we won the Bronze Award together, we did with the council and many others. But that's just the start, and we're going on towards silver and so on. So this is part of a continuum, and we're just getting into our stride now, to be honest. The last two big events, it's really what have informed this particular policy brief, was a workshop which we did at the back end of last year, should have been followed by another one very quickly, but there was a delay. But we did manage to run it at the beginning of September. We ran it online, and the policy brief is really fully informed by the output of that. So we looked at some of the problems and the barriers across the city, the things that are preventing us from having a good, healthy, sustainable food system. And there's quite a lot of them. I won't go through it in detail. We can go bring some of these out in the discussion afterwards if you like, but we know there's some national problems with cheap food being prioritised and the damage that that causes to health and the environment, supposedly being picked up by health and environmental services, but you can only rectify a very small bit of it. You know, the damage is done, never get it back. There's all the problems with funding cuts and the whole issue about food poverty. I mean, we lumped it together into one point. There's a whole big thing there, very important. We have problems with the supermarkets who've been running the show, but they don't always engage with the problem in the way that we like. They've got they're all doing really interesting things, and there's a bit of a sea change, but we do need to get them in the room to look at what's happening at our city level. We don't have a good enough contact with the farmers locally. You know, the food is grown there's a lot of land around Leeds, but it all goes into the national system. It's distributed around the country, comes back to us. Might be cheap, but it's carrying a lot of environmental costs with it. Then there's the lack of knowledge and skills about nutrition and so on. We can go on. There's plenty of green land within Leeds, but we can't always get access to it. There's a lot of barriers. There is quite a lot of small scale commercial production. It's bubbling up, but it's very tight on margins, and we need to remove some of the barriers there. Then there's the whole issue of food waste. It's being sent to the energy plant, which is lowering the capacity of that plant because it's wet, when we could be using that for composting and putting it into various different circular opportunities. And then we've got problems with lack of investment and so on. There's a lot more, but we have identified these and we know what they are, and we pretty much know what to do about most of them as well. But then we've got lots of strengths and opportunities, really a lot. So we've got timely social change, circular economics, we've got waste and plastic reduction. There's a lot of public interest in this, new funding streams, some big initiatives, not least the lottery funding. The food industry itself is recognising the need for change, looking at lowering their carbon emissions, sorting out biodiversity, sugar and salt, all these things. It's a slow process, but we do see change. Farmers are looking for shorter supply chains, new routes to market, reducing the amount of livestock, because we all know how much problem is associated with meat. We've got plenty of grade 1 farmland, as I said. Brownfield sites where we can do things like vertical farms. We've got an excellent vertical farm project running in Leeds. Devolution, the mayor elections, providing all kinds of opportunities. Loads of local expertise. Growing is not a difficult thing to do. Nature does it. You just have to have somebody to hold your hand, and away you go. We've got a commercial urban farm network. We've got 3 commercial farms in Leeds and lots of others around, which we're building together. We've got a very strong fresh food offer, things like the Leeds Indie Food Network. And we've had a really strong emergency food provision, which we could list people like Real Junk Food Project and all of those, plenty of them, and very much centred in Leeds. There's a lot of expertise and commitment there. So the recommendation that we have, I'm keeping this very brief so we can talk about it afterwards. We've got one main recommendation and 4 priorities. We would like the council, as I said earlier on, to create a task force with a high profile officer, or it could be a member, but somebody who's got food and agriculture in their job title. So if anybody's looking around, they know that person is the person to go to. We've already got a very good internal food group run by Public Health, which has got some of the more junior officers in, but we need to get the senior officers and there are certain departments who haven't engaged with us, particularly planning, but there's various others who have a lot of the hands on the levers, but we're not able to really get through to them and make the points we need to make. and we need to have them in that group. They need to be made to come to the table. And when they come, they will find there's lots they can do. And it's really interesting because it really helps things like, you know, building new housing. There's all kinds of interesting stuff we can do. So that's the main thing we want. That's really the only thing we need to do straight away. The rest is priorities that come afterwards. We think we should create a local food brand, which we can then almost insist on for all procurement, major events. Just going back to what Paul was talking about earlier on, we mustn't forget things like all of the sports groups, which go vertically through society. If you get the right food going into those kind of events, then you're really starting to get out into areas which are difficult to reach in other ways. We need to improve access to land. We've got lots of public land, but we've also got interesting private land becoming available. There are big landowners like Yorkshire Water, who we're talking to, doing some fascinating things, good relationship with them. We need to grow the business ecosystem, which is supporting innovation, providing incentives, creating new sales platforms and routes to market. None of these things are particularly expensive. They just facilitate the entrepreneurial spirit and get rid of some of the barriers, and then it will start to just change the whole ecosystem. And very important to educate and upskill. That means we have to go on doing research. We've got a series of workshops and other things we want to do. Paola's got some really interesting work, which she'll probably talk about in a minute. And then we've got other things we want to build in, where we need to make sure that all this information is available for the public to find. We need to keep the dialogues going through the various different hubs and things like that. It's a relative food. Everybody's interested in food because everybody eats. So you just need to change the dialogue a little bit, and people are interested and they come on board. So that's the gist of it. So next steps we would like to see is the terms of reference for the task force, and then the establishment of that task force, and then to engage with all sectors of the food system, including industry. It's really important that this is co-created. Local authorities, Leeds is much better than most, but local authorities have an unfortunate habit of doing all the research, doing all the engagement, finding out what it is they need to do, and then doing it and forgetting to really involve the people they were talking to before at the point of doing it. And we don't want that to happen this time. We've got a really good network, really good organizations, fully involved. And if we can do this together and bring in the industry, and industry are involved already, but we need to really make that as easy as possible, we can start to move very quickly and get a lot done quite cheaply. So then we can start individual task groups on some of the things. There's some more things on the list, actually, some very interesting things on the list. And then we'll keep the research going around, and we want to make sure that we've got a good platform where we share all this data and all this information. So just to sum up, in the face of the climate emergency, international uncertainty and the challenges of poor diets and health risks, and now with COVID-19, Leeds has the opportunity to create a citywide food strategy that promotes climate resilience, health, sustainability and food security. Leeds, thanks largely to progress by the Leeds Climate Commission and the commitment of the Leeds City Council, is well suited to lead UK cities, and I do mean that, it is leading. We are at the front of this in developing meaningful actions. Every sector, academia, government, civil society, and especially business, has a vital role in building the city we want. But to build back better our food system and to green our city, we must have leadership and strategic vision, and we need to grow food wherever we can.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, Tom. That's a fascinating presentation.
You want to take back control of my? You can get that back, can you? The control of the screen.
At any moment, Harriet, my dauntless officer, is going to bail me out with this. And
you've gone to quite a small screen then. I've lost the little thing that says share screen.
Well,
hi Tom. I think you just need to click on the button at the top that says stop sharing screen.
Ah, yes, that's it. Gotcha.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Harriet. That's much appreciated. Right. So, I mean, that was super fascinating. So what I want to do is I've got a couple of members who want to ask you questions. We do have the climate jury to go over, right?
Yeah.
As well, members. So just to say that, and there's some detail in there as well. So let's keep things brief. So I've got in the order I saw them, I've got Councillor Ray, Councillor Bentley, and then Councillor Collins. So Paul first.
It's more of a comment than a question. I think it's
okay.
This great tension we have in Leeds about land usage, and I know I've raised previously meetings, particularly around the council's reliance on food. Bear in mind, we're one of the biggest caterers in the city, and whether one of the conversations we need to have as a council, particularly with our own asset management team, particularly in the industrial areas where we have very large industrial units, is around vertical farming for food security, producing our own food locally that we can commercially sell if necessary, but actually to secure our own food basis and actually create jobs, bearing in mind a large number of industries are going south incredibly quickly with large footprints. And I think it's something we do need to take action, I think, as a conversation to civic enterprise and to leaders around that in the council, because actually there's a huge opportunity for us to reduce our carbon footprint, create jobs, and actually bring a lot of that land to use other than just for houses, because we obviously love conversations about houses in Leeds.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Paul. I mean, Andy, thanks for being able to join us. That's great. Did you want to come back on that to Councillor Ray's point, or briefly, or? So, I thought you saw your hand up. You see, sorry if it wasn't.
No, I was just agreeing. I mean, Leeds has got huge potential to grow a lot more food. Both the urban and the peri-urban environment can have more food growing, and also the fact that we have got a huge amount of agricultural land already. You know, there's choices about what and how we grow on the land around, around the city, which is substantial, probably more than almost any other European city in terms of the amount of agricultural land within the boundaries. So I think a wholesale review of urban, rural and peri-urban land is essential.
Okay, excellent. All right, okay. Again, duly noted. Yeah, sure.
Can I just respond specifically to the vertical farm aspect? Vertical farming comes in a number of different guises. It often means hydroponic growing, which is what Growing Better, which has been involved with myself, and they're very much involved with us for some time. And then there's a potential project which Yorkshire Water are doing at Esholt. And yes, we absolutely need to do this, because if you're going to industrialise the food system, you might as well go the whole hog. The problem really is the margins. So at the moment, what they're finding is it's quite easy to sell the high-end stuff into chefy stuff, which is the great way to start. But it needs to have the investment, and it needs to be upscaled to the point where it then starts providing nutritious food at the right price. So there's a big thing to do, but it's absolutely something we need to look at. And we've got a potential meeting about this scheduled. We haven't fixed it up, but we do need to have a subgroup specifically on this topic, because I know Paola knows a lot about it. In fact, I think lots
yeah, there's a lot of work we're going to be doing together. Don't worry. It's not just this session, folks. So don't worry. I'm on this committee, and the agenda's enormous, and we're always pushed for time. But that's why we have the subgroups, and we're going to be really flexible along those lines. So, Councillor Bentley, your hands up again. Yeah, Councillor Bentley, then Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly again, you may have covered this, or you may want to cover it later, but again, this is another presentation where there's a definite ask of this committee, which we'll need to make a decision on. I'd like to know what that process is at some point. But my real question to Tom and his group, following that excellent presentation, something I'm really, really impressed with, something I care a lot about, is we're talking here about Leeds, but in 12 months' time, 2 years' time, we're going to be part of a bigger devolved authority, a combined authority with an elected mayor and some form of governance. And that will increase the scope, I would have thought, of access to more land, economies of scale, more producers, more farmers, and all those sorts of things. Have you built that in going forward to see how we can work as a larger devolved Yorkshire rather than a smaller Leeds?
We have started. There is a group with Zero Carbon Yorkshire. We're talking about establishing a bigger group. But the great thing about food is it's a universal story, really. We all understand the basics. I personally welcome this because the larger authority, because from an ecological point of view, Leeds and Bradford are one city. And it's always struck me as being difficult trying to address some issues. And we certainly have issues with green spaces and so on, where we have this very artificial divide. So in terms of the food shed and in terms of commuting and in terms of lots of things, Leeds and Bradford are definitely one city. In fact, the whole conurbation is one city. So some of these things are much better looked at that larger scale. So I think it will be a good thing myself. I don't know whether some of my other colleagues need to chip in on
Can I
this.
make a very brief point?
Very brief point, Andy, yeah.
In terms of farm payments, by 2024, we'll be moving to the Environmental Land Management Scheme. And there are 3 tiers of payments. So as a first tier 1 is just for a farmer to do what they're doing on their own land, or a land manager. Tier 2 is where farmers or land managers work together. And tier 3 is for really strategic regional work. And I think there's a huge potential for Leeds, as part of West Yorkshire Combined Authority, to be doing some tier 3 strategic work. Yeah. So there's not only the potential, but there's a potential mechanism to pay for that kind of strategic activity.
Oh, that's, yeah, I see where you're coming from. So speaking of potential, because there's an awful lot of potential here, and neatly segueing into the fact that it's Councillor Collins next up to speak, what I suggest is the food working group, we organise a further session with you guys, and then and Don and team, which I'll join in, will take this forward, because there is so much to go at here, and it's really important. And because we could fill, I mean, I don't want to be the chair that harps on about time all the time, but there's a lot to go from the citizens' jury, and I don't want you guys who've come along, we're very thankful, to feel disappointed anyway. This is why we have the working group. So what I suggest, Dawn, is we organise for the next food working group that this is a major item.
Yeah,
over to you.
That's part of what I was going to suggest, actually. Well, it's already on the agenda, probably you'll know. But I'm very interested in hearing more about this strategic planning with the 3 tiers. I'm very fortunate living in Horsforth. I'm surrounded by green fields, but I also know from local information that those fields are actually owned by trusts. Now, unfortunately, they're no longer trusts that are managing the land for the benefit of the people of Horsforth and Rawdon. They're managing it so that they still maintain a profit. So in part, I want to defend the farmers, especially the ones around here, because they're keen to stay farmers. They are keen to look after the land and make the land work for everybody. But because their landlords are actually private individuals whose focus is on building and developing those sites, the fact that we've got good agricultural land is secondary to them. So I'm just sort of giving Tom and his team a bit of a heads up that I think we need to look at how we can break that stranglehold on our good arable land from the people who do actually own it, and get it actually into the hands of farmers who actually want to make it good for everybody.
Yeah, I think they're key questions, aren't they? And this, in answer to Councillor Bentley's question about how do we respond to these asks, well, it's through the working group, then back to us as a committee proper, because like I said, there's an awful lot to go at. Right, folks. Oh, Councillor Illingworth, just seen your hand.
Chair, that agreed with much of what Tom said. Excellent presentation, but to flag up, there is this degree of competition. I can see competition in my own ward at the moment between different land uses, between agriculture, between biodiversity, between sport and recreation. We ain't got lots of land to go around, and as things tighten up, it's going to be more and more difficult to satisfy all the various demands. And finally, a bit of music to Dawn's ears. One way of attacking this problem is through land value taxation, something I'd love to talk to other elected members about.
Well, it's.
I think it was Councillor Carter who brought that up.
It was when we realised that Councillor Carter had been reading the Labour Party manifesto about LVT. We all got quite excited on the development plan panel the other day. There's definitely a rabbit hole we could go down, but there is a lot to talk about, folks. But I am going to have to guillotine this bit of the meeting. Tom, very briefly.
Just to say, I agree entirely with what John's saying. John and I know each other well, working with the Kirksville Farm project, which we were involved with together for a long time. It's absolutely true, but I see this as an opportunity. So as a landscape architect, everything that we do is about knowing how to design. It's all about design. Yeah. So you can do all of the things you mentioned there at the same time in the same place if you get the design right. It's partly about permaculture principles. It's partly about conventional landscape architecture. It's actually quite easy, and it makes it more exciting, and it brings more people on board. It's productive, and it's beautiful, and it's accessible. to all of us.
We must talk, yes. Later.
No, I think there'll be a lot of conversations emanating out from this meeting. That's excellent, folks. But I am going to guillotine it at that because there's a lot to go through still. But thank you so much for coming along and giving that presentation. It's really, really interesting. You can see why we set up this committee and why we enjoy bringing everything together and doing the work that we do. So thank you so much. You are most welcome to stay, but you don't have to. But we won't think ill of you if you disappear. It's fine. It's been a long day. And Councillor Mulheron, I have to give her apologies. She's called away to another meeting, such as the life and exec board member. So on that note, we are going to go back to my notes. So item number 11, which is in your supplementary pack, which is the response to the citizen jury's recommendations. And I'm very pleased to hand over to Polly for this.
Thank you, Councillor Warshaw. So I'll do it briefly so there's time for questions. But I suppose just to set the context, so I think we came in March with the original kind of response to the jury. We should have come back in July, but clearly there were some challenges over the last few months. So we've done our response, and then we'll keep that up on a quarterly basis. And I think in the context and the introduction, we've just set out what some of those challenges and kind of changes of context are. One being the devolution deal, which was one of the kind of asks, I suppose, of the citizens jury about bringing people together and more kind of local decision making, regional decision making. So, you know, that will be happening with the election next year in May. And then obviously the context of the pandemic, which has so many impacts. So, you know, from anything where it's allowed us to speed up the delivery of our district heating network to where it's brought our electric van scheme to a standstill for a period of time. So there's been a whole range of impacts, and then it has kind of fundamentally changed, as Councillor Buckley alluded to earlier, you know, in terms of the use of public transport, but it's given us other opportunities for funding for things like the active transport scheme. So I don't think you can underestimate the impact that's been caused over the last 6 months on a lot of different strands of work, and just as basic in terms of the number of staff that have actually been employed elsewhere to do things like the food provision for the city. And then when we look, we've gone through and updated the different recommendations. We haven't updated all of them. Some are kind of the same as the last one, but you know, in terms of transport, we've looked at things like obviously the school street scheme that we've already mentioned, some of the different kind of bids that we've been able to bid into as a result of the pandemic around active transport. So we've updated those, and I won't read through the list. And then in terms of housing retrofit, again, it's given us an opportunity to bid for a number of different funds. And so again, we're going to do some really deep retrofit in a variety of areas, and we're waiting for announcements on different funds. It's also allowed us to put another bid in for an expansion of the district heat network, which means that the South Bank regeneration will be based on low carbon heat. So there's been kind of lots of work going on behind the scenes, and so there has been progress made. On the funding one, we had said we were going to put together a community bond scheme, which we still are keen to do. However, we've had a kind of positive barrier to that at the moment, that we are anticipating in the next week or so that there will be some government funding that will be in the form of grant that will enable us to do that kind of public sector retrofit schemes, which were what we were going to put through the community bond. And obviously from a value for money point of view, a grant provides better value for money at this moment in time than the community bond will. But we still think that community bond will have a place, but the timing at this moment in time isn't right. And then there's a section on the comms where we've gone through and updated. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we were fairly quiet on comms because we didn't feel that it was appropriate, and that, you know, there were other things people wanted to hear about, and people were worried about their own safety, and so it wasn't the right time. But we've started to ramp the comms back up. Our monthly newsletter's still coming out, and we're now up to 5,000 subscribers on that, and that gives us an opportunity to highlight not just what the council's doing, but also what the whole city's doing. So I'll send an email out to all members afterwards. So if anyone hasn't signed up to that newsletter, I'd really encourage you to do that. So things like the bid that Paul talked to us about, that was all announced in there. So it's a really good way of keeping up to date and just seeing the pace of change that's happening. And then what we're focusing on is each month kind of different comms. So we had a district heating month. We've had, hopefully you've all seen the electric bike scheme launch that actually hit apparently the news in the CNN news, which was fairly amazing. which actually has sold out in terms of space within about a week. We have 200 people on the waiting list for that e-bike scheme. So there has been lots of positives and comms going on, lots of progress, but there have also been an amazing amount of challenges during this period. So if I leave it there, and then if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to comment.
Yeah, thanks for that, Polly. That's really, really helpful. I mean, there has been an awful lot going on. But a big thanks to you and your team for continuing working through all of this late unpleasantness. Now, who wants to ask questions for Polly for the Citizens Jury update? Councillor Collins, is your hand up or is it a residual hand from the previous?
It's residual from the previous, sorry, Chair.
Okay. I'm not seeing any indications of people wanting to speak. Councillor Ray, thank you very much.
Yeah, just a really quick one on the comms. I mean, what variety of comms are we using, particularly as the pandemic's shown that actually some of the more traditional communication types have pretty much gone on their head? Are we doing, I know of specific campaigns we do like paid adverts for Facebook and stuff like that. Has there been an analysis of broadening out? Are we looking at WhatsApp groups where people can register to get direct articles and stuff like that? Are we looking at local radio, local newspapers, rather than just some of the bigger regional ones? Because I am curious as to see how we're actually getting particularly to those poorer communities.
Okay, so I think throughout the pandemic we have relied really heavily on social media and the different varieties of social media, but we are in discussions about widening it out. Obviously some of the kind of radio type things can be quite challenging because of the budget side of it at the moment, but we are looking for opportunities at how we widen that out and make it more comprehensive.
Okay, yep, thanks. Yeah, I think if I had a £10 note for every time I've been in a meeting that it would use the phrase budget challenges, I think I'd be driving away in a Lamborghini. Councillor Bentley next. Not that I would buy a Lamborghini, not everyone fret or anything. Councillor Bentley, please.
You wouldn't want to, would you, Chair?
I just want to put it on the public record. I don't own any Lamborghinis. This is how rumours start, Councillor Bentley. Stop it.
I know. Can I just raise two sort of specific questions on the council's response to some of these recommendations? So the first one is the transport strategy, where the council's response says that the strategy's vision is that Leeds is a city where you do not need a car. Well, that might be an aspiration or a nice to have. I don't really see that as a strategy, particularly when further down it talks about park and rides and everything else, which is accommodating people who need a car, but that's just a minor point. But if the strategy really is to dissuade people from using their cars, or persuade people perhaps in your circumstances you don't need one, there's a few things I think we could perhaps pad out that particular recommendation, response to the recommendation. We're talking about trying to stop people going to the city centre, parking charges, those sort of things. There's no mention of a workplace parking levy, which is an issue which a number of authorities, what one has adopted it completely and generated a substantial amount of money ring-fenced for public transport. And Birmingham, just before the pandemic, had a paper that was going to go to exec on the same issue. And also things like bus lanes, bus priorities. I'm sure they're in there somewhere, but I think if we start off by saying it's a city where you don't need a car, I think it's more about managing the car. And the other one was on housing and improving the climate standards and energy standards in housing. And it does mention private rented sector, and I think probably the private rented sector is the biggest hurdle we've got to improving energy standards in our total housing stock in the city. And again, I think one of the weapons we have for that, apart from the sort of monetary grant weapon, but also extending the selective licensing scheme, so it gives the council more direct control on the standards that the landlords have to comply with. And I know that the argument against that is often, oh, well, it's really difficult to extend it. But again, I know authorities where most of the private rented sector in the authority is subject to a selective licensing scheme. So I think we could explore that a lot more as a way of improving our energy standards. Thanks, Chair.
No, thanks. I mean, yeah, selective licensing and a lot of the opposition comes from landlords in the city, and I don't think that really holds much weight. Private landlords don't just be short of a bob or two, to put it crudely. So yeah, I think we need to look at selective licensing and how we bring that into reducing carbon emissions. But also, let's remember that brings also into the realms of thinking about affordable warmth, reducing people's energy bills. Again, bringing climate benefits into and marrying them up with real tangible benefits for people's finances. But yes, I think that's nothing's off the list with respect to housing. I think the private rented sector is the most intractable though, and that is going to require an awful lot of mass mobilization nationally. I mean, Ed Miliband, Shadow Energy Secretary, has talked about mobilizing what amounts to a carbon army with respect to decarbonising the housing stock, including the PRS, private rented sector. That's the kind of level of engagement this problem needs. And it needs to happen really rather quickly. So, Councillor Carl, do you want to speak to some of the transport related points, I suspect?
Yeah, I was just going to, I don't know whether Polly wanted to provide an answer, but I was just going to come in because the transport strategy is something that I'm somewhat involved in as it starts drafting. There is mention in the report about the workplace parking levy, and it notes that I think all options are being looked into for what could be used. I think the one problem is obviously a parking levy is a discouragement on using your car rather than an encouragement to do something else. So I think the report, the strategy is going to look at as much encouragement as possible first. That city where you don't need a car is the vision for the 2030 date of finishing off the strategy. I think we all know that from motorway city of the 70s, there's a lot we have to do to not need a car. Some journeys, unfortunately, are still pretty difficult to make if you don't have a car, and well aware of those living in an area cut off by the ring road. But yeah, so I think that's the key, is first allowing people to make that choice, that they don't have to have a car if they choose not to, not forcibly removing people from their car, but allowing every opportunity to make that other choice. And then I think when we've got those options, because unfortunately Leeds finds itself, as many of us know, somewhat short in the mass transit area. Unfortunately, our options are very limited at the moment for alternative methods people can use, and that's really what we need to build up first before we start being too punitive. And that's where public transport's a real difficulty at the moment. So yeah, increasing public transport back to pre-COVID levels is going to be something that we'll be looking at, because the bus is the way that people in Leeds move around. The majority of people in Leeds move around without a car, and unfortunately at the moment that's not open to people. So yeah, work on that is going to be very important going forward. I'll leave it there, Chair, in the means of brevity.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. And I agree with everything you've said. There is no quick answer with transport. But just to add to what Peter said, when we look at the local plan review, one of the things that have evolved rapidly over the last 6-7 months is looking at low traffic neighbourhoods, but also looking at the 15-minute neighbourhood. Now, look, let's be absolutely blunt. COVID-19 is not going to be around with us forever, but it has changed how we live and how we work now. Now, some of those things are negative and some of the things are positive, and we need to capture that into looking at how 15-minute neighborhood works. Because if we can fundamentally reduce the need to travel, not through any draconian measures, but just by living and working and playing differently, then that'll really help. So, for example, if we can capture, as folks know, when traffic levels fell by around 60% during the height of the lockdown, well, if we can sort of capture about a third of that on a sustained ongoing basis, that'll really change how our city operates and how it feels, with commensurate benefits for air quality and public health. So it's really looking at transport and how we use land and space and how we build up neighborhoods that'll really help. So we absolutely do need a rapid transit system though, Peter, don't worry. I don't think we should ever detract from getting that. Right, anyone else? Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to make a couple of practical points.
Sure.
I think you were in danger, Chair, of going into a flight of fancy slightly about future possibilities.
Perish the thought.
But I know that Councillor Blackburn and I used to have discussions about how the buses ought to be owned, and this is referred to here. And of course, I think the government actually must have taken advice from him, because they've gone his way. And but you know, on a serious point, really, as somebody mentioned earlier, we're going to have a mayor and a different setup next year, and all this talk about short journeys across town, journeys to work, and so on and so forth, which just cannot be taken now unless you have a car. If we're actually aspiring to fill all those gaps, it's going to cost a lot of money. And if the mayor's got a budget, he'll either have to fill the entire budget with running Councillor Blackburn's buses, or have to charge us an awful lot of money. An observation.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. I thought it was going to be the meeting where you finally committed to full Marxism, but I was so close, but not quite yet. I mean, look, you're onto one of my favourite subjects, as you all well know, committee members, is look, a deregulated privatised bus network has been given a substantial crack of the whip, and it's failed in its entirety. That's got to change. It's kind of changing on an ad hoc basis, but some municipal planning and ownership or stake in public transport writ large, and then the proper integration of different public transport modes is inevitable, really, because the current system we have now is neither use nor ornament, and we need to be clear about that. And so, yeah, I think Councillor Blackburn's and myself and other members here probably have quite a lot of overlap on how we view public transport, but we have to have a public transport that serves our needs, and it doesn't at the moment, and you can't get past that. It's a fundamental structural problem in transport, particularly in England, and it needs sorting, and sorting fast. Councillor Blackburn and Councillor Illingworth, have your hands up, and then I'm going to wrap things up.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to hear that from Councillor Buckley that the Prime Minister's been listening to me, but I wouldn't have known it if he hadn't told me, I mind you. I've got to say, one of what we've hit at the moment is one of the problems that have been caused, certainly in my lifetime, and was, I mean, I can remember when we had, as a youngster, when we had slum clearance, and the fact was, you shopped near where you lived, and you worked near where you lived, and basically you used public transport if you went anywhere else. But most of the time, you were a 5 minutes or 10 minutes walk away from where you lived. And that ended when we pulled down these slums, because that's what there were, a lot of them, and built these council estates on the outskirts, which we went to live on the Swinner, and it was lovely. I learned what white was. It wasn't mucky, a sort of mucky grey as it had been when I lived in the old house back of a coking plant and at side of the railway sheds. So I've got to say that's one of the reasons our public transport never grew with people moving away from where they worked and where they shopped. And what we've got to do is we've got to find some environmentally nice way of putting work, people and shops together. So we don't have to use a car. We don't have to use public transport. We can walk. And that's the difficulty, I think.
I agree. That was the long version of saying a 15-minute neighbourhood is a good idea, I think. Councillor Illingworth.
click on, oh, that's better. The shift bar, the place bar works. It's a thing to fix on our system that if you click on the symbol for the microphone, nothing happens. Anyway, let's move on. I'm just conscious, Chair, that we haven't responded on issue I, the airport, and yet the presentation for the public at the start were heavily focused on that and people demanding an answer. So I would like to say a little tiny bit about the airport because I think it is a major issue.
By all means.
And the point I want to make is that the aviation industry needs to make carbon emissions the absolute centerpiece of its R&D efforts until it's fixed, because it can't be left as it is. And so they should do research and development first. They should fix the problem of CO2 emissions, and then we can talk about expansion. Second point is that the airport operator needs increased traffic to fund the expansion. It's dishonest in a way for us to say, go ahead with the expansion, old chap, but we're going to throttle you off and not allow you to actually pay for it. And therefore, we have to say to them, don't expand the airport until you fix the problem with CO2 emissions. Need to concentrate minds within the aviation industry. And we should tell them that. Fix the emissions first, then you can expand. And it seems we fall short on that at the moment, Chair, and I feel we ought to be saying something a bit more forcefully. There's also a subsidiary issue, particularly in my ward, of aircraft noise. It's less serious than climate change. It isn't the same problem as CO2 emissions, but nevertheless it's there. And so we should also be saying to the airport operator, you need to fix your flight patterns, you need to fix your noise emissions, you need to stop waking people up in the middle of the night and the early morning, because it's not nice. And I just wish we'd gone a little bit further in our response on I understand the pressure the council's under, the need to protect jobs and so forth, really important stuff. But even so, I think the public are looking for a more vigorous response.
No, thanks for that. And well, I mean, had this year panned out differently, without everything going haywire in the middle of March, we would have had another session on aviation, and we would have had possibly even 2 sessions on aviation, and then this committee would have a view in terms of local and national, international aviation policies and process that we would recommend to happen. But obviously things went haywire. And then the airport, the pesky blighters went and put a live planning application in. Now, we have no statutory function with respect to live planning applications, which is unfortunate, but that's the way the legislation's framed. There's also a number of us who also sit on the city plans panel, and we're decision makers on the airport application. So there is it's important that we're not seen to predetermine a plan application. I mean, look, planning's a quasi-judicial role. We take it extremely seriously in Leeds, and we wouldn't want to compromise that in any way. And whether people are proponents for the airport and expansion or objectors to it, then they need to bear that in mind. I think it's important that when any planning application, any planning issue faces us, that the elected members taking the decision on that application are fully, if you like, commensurate with the issues, the legislation and everything around that application. And that's why we didn't want to detract from that process with respect to the airport. But that's been the way 2020's fallen, which is very 2020 when you think about it. It's been that kind of year. So there is a lot to be said about aviation. You're right. I mean, as I said many times in public forums, it's not aviation that's the problem, it's carbon aviation that's the problem in large part. And they have a huge problem. And they need to come up with ways and means to address that, and they need to do it rather fast. And we've got interestingly, for many members here, we've got a meeting on Friday of the City Plans panel, which is a position statement from the airport. So we'll see how far they've got down that road. And I will be asking them some very searching questions, Councillor Longworth, I think, on Friday, and that will be going out on the World Wide Web. So, is any further points regarding the citizens' jury update? Nope. Excellent. Okay. So what about the date and time of the next meeting? And then I'll wrap up. Harriet?
Thanks, Chair. The date and time of the next meeting is the Thursday, the 22nd of October at 10:30 a.m.
Lovely. Well, thank you for that. Well, listen, folks, there's an awful lot of ground we covered today. It's good to be back with the working groups moving and shaking again. That's really important. We've picked up an awful lot of work for the food and agriculture team. I think that's excellent. So I look forward to joining in those sessions. And it's 17:30. We're finishing on the dot. I'd like to thank you all very much for your contributions today, and have a safe journey home to your kitchens. Anyway, thanks, folks. If Harriet will switch us off from the internet and close the meeting, but thanks.